In this part of the course, we're going to be discussing the App Designer query data sources. The query data sources are designed primarily to help populate forms, list views, and charts. And as we discussed in the introduction, you can execute data sources on events from the toolbar. So, for instance, you may well have a combo box on the toolbar. You enter a customer name or customer number in there. That raises an event, and you can say, when this event is raised, please execute this data source. We can pass the customer number from the combo box into the data source, execute the data source, and it will return the data back to our app. Now, that might well populate a form. It might also populate maybe a list view of invoices. And if, for instance, you clicked on maybe a row on your list view, you could raise an event and run another data source, which might populate maybe a form or a dialog form with more information about that particular invoice. Now, each data source can format its output to match the format of the user interface control or UI control being targeted. So, for instance, you can say, I want to create a query data source. This is what I'm going to do. And when I get the response back, I want it back as a form to populate a form, or I want it back to populate a list view or a chart. Now, if you're targeting a form, you'll only ever get one row back from the query data source. If you're targeting a list view or a chart, clearly you are going to get multiple rows back. Now, there are three types of query data source. The query data source that targets a business object, and therefore keys and variable data is passed into the data source and is used to set parameters on the XML in for the data source, along with a primary node to the data source saying, when you get the data back from the query, this is the XML node that I want you to look for, and then give me all the children for that node. And when you're using business objects in this way, particularly, and we'll see it shortly in our example, you should use the XML in options to try to turn off all the extraneous data that you don't want. So as an example, if you're only interested in the header information from a customer, you do not need invoices, transactions, post-dated checks, and whatever else you can turn off. So it's useful to be able to fine-tune that. The second one is a table name, and the query data source can target a Syspro table or business activity query and pass key values to it, and it will return a single row of data for you to work on. And any table within the Syspro data dictionary, which is predominantly the report writer, can be targeted in that way. And then finally, we've provided a custom data source, which allows you to target external databases, or databases generally, could be the Syspro one, using OLEDB, ODBC, or Transact SQL drivers. And we'll be discussing all these shortly. And then when the data is returned, as I say, it will return it formatted either for forms, or list views, charts, and so on like that. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to try to use a lot of these types in a worked example. So it's going to be a fairly straightforward example. Now, I've knocked up a bit of a spec here. And the reason I wanted to show you this is that not only have I sort of laid out the layout, but I've actually started to identify the business object, in this case ARSQRY, that I actually want to use, and what the key element information. So I'm saying, here I'm looking for the header element, and when I've got it, I want to populate that form. Here I've got ARSQRY, and I'm looking for invoice detail, and so on. So at this stage, it does help in your design to start to identify where on earth am I going to get the data from. Now, one key factor here, which is important, is that when you're looking at, say, a diagram like that, you might be forgiven for thinking that a data source is for a form or a single pane. But in fact, if you've got multiple forms and therefore multiple panes, you can mix and match the data from the different business objects across the panes. And we'll be looking at that in our example. And hopefully, with a luck and fair wind, this will be our finished app with some header information, historical information, some invoice, sales order information, invoices and sales orders, and so on like that. So what we're going to be doing now is starting to build up on the app, and this is all in the source code available at the end of the course. Well, here we are in App Designer, and I've done a little bit of preparatory work for our sample. None of this should be new to you. It's all the stuff we covered in the previous two courses. But just to recap, here we have our file and our exit. Just to point out to you that App Designer understands the caption exit. It will automatically raise event 60,000 and close the app. You do not need any code in VBScript to close the app. And in a similar way, the button on a toolbar can be immediately wired to running a dialog box, which is obviously this help text here, without any code as well. And if we are in doing help and you're typing stuff in, just one reminder, don't forget to check this one, save notepad contents when designing, because if you don't check it, you'll type a load of stuff in there, save it, and it will magically disappear. So be careful on that. So let's just have a quick run of our app. Okay, so if we bob our help, there's our help. And if we do our exit, job done. If we have a quick look at the VB script behind it, all absolutely none. So other than a comment, which I always like to do in all my code, and I would strongly recommend you comment all your stuff, I've just put in these two event handlers because we're going to be using them shortly. But other than that, no code at all to get the basic app up and going, which is, I think, pretty good. Okay, so let's move on. Our next step then is to add our two data sources, one for the header information and one for the total section. But before I do that, I just want to go off on a bit of a tangent, and that's just talk about the help screen. The toolbar here, editing, allowing us to edit it, is fairly limited. And the notepad control here actually will render RTF files very nicely. So what we've found elsewhere in the system is that we create our help in Word, which allows us to put screenshots in and things like that, and then cut and save it as an RTF file, and then open it again, and then cut and paste the stuff out of Word and pop it into here, and we find that the control will render it beautifully, even though it doesn't give us a facility for putting screenshots in and things like that. And you'll see on some of our apps, that particularly the samples, you'll find us using that technique quite regularly. So there's a little bit of a digression. Anyway, we'll park the help over here and we'll get on with adding data sources. So that's the button here. So we'll press it. And here we've got a button for adding queries, transactions, and web services. And to begin with, we're just going to be doing the query. First things first, then, it wants a name. So let's give it something like customer header. That's good. And we're going to choose the business object type for the query data source. So first things first, a couple of other options here. Clear data if invalid key. This is controlling how you want the data source to behave if you key in an invalid key. So for instance, if you had got a combo box and you keyed in the customer number and you passed the key that you keyed in to the data source, and maybe it was customer 1 and it all worked and it populated the form beautifully. If then you, next time around, you keyed an invalid customer number, then what do you want the data source to do? Well, it would make sense probably to clear the form. And that's what this property does. It allows you to clear the form. And then secondly, maybe you pop up an error as well. So validation and error handling is being handled by the data source itself. And you can put element names in here. If you put element name %, you can extend the message if you want to. Execute when key is blank seems a bit of an odd one, but actually there are times when you would create a data source that you might want to fire on initialization as the app is actually loading, and therefore there is no key. So what we're saying here is, if there's no key, still execute, don't wait for one. That's fine. And then finally, what's the name of the business object that we actually want to do? Well, we can browse for the business objects here, that's fine. But in fact, what we're going to be doing is using ARSQRY. Those of you who've done custom panes will know an awful lot about business objects. First things first, though, is we need to edit the XML in. Note here, though, that this is how we know where the key goes. %key % is the variable holder, and it will pop it in there. And all I'm going to be doing now is coming down here and knocking out the bits of the data that I actually don't want, like that. And we'll save that. And now what it needs is we need to select the primary node that it's going to be retrieving data for, and that's the header information. So just remember what the business object will do. It will run. App Designer will say, I'm looking for the header element, and it will return the children of the header element for us. So we will do that. And then there is one final option called return all elements. There are times, possibly and probably in it when you're actually executing a data source in VBScript, where you don't want just simply the children from one node. You want the whole of the response back from the business object, and that will check that, and it will override any selection here. You'll just simply get the response back in its entirety, and you would have to manually process it in your VBScript. So we will save that. We will add another one. And it's going to be business object. We don't want to change that. It's still going to be ARSQRY. I won't bother changing any of the XML in. We'll just take the default, and we will select the total section, which is great. Select that, save it, and now we'll come out. Now notice in our list view here, we've now got our two data sources. What we will find as we start to use the data source and bind it to a form, this is actually a tree view, and what we will see is customer header, and then we will get a list of the fields that we've actually bound to on the form. And over here, it's a business object type. There's the business object, and that's the node that it's actually picking up. So quite a lot of information just from this one screen. So now that we've done that, next step is to add a couple of forms for our header and our total. Adding forms is actually very simple. All we've actually got to do is go to the toolbox and click our form, and it will add a form pane. But before we do that, I just want to remind you of what we're actually trying to achieve here. We're going to be adding our customer info pane here, and our financial info we'll be doing. And what I've actually done is marked on here the fields from each data source. So the red ones are for the header, and the green ones are for the total. And this is the first time you've probably seen that we can actually mix and match data from different data sources on the same pane. And we'll be discussing a little bit of that in a minute. So let's try that. So there we go, toolbox and form. It adds a form and prompts us for a title. So we'll put customer info on there. Nothing to change here at all. It's not editable, so it's not a problem. Now, if you got a bit impatient and double click the form and you'd end up with two forms, just a bit of a reminder that in the pane properties section, there's how you delete a pane, and it will just simply highlight the pane, press it, and everything goes, the pane and everything on it as well. So just be a little bit careful, but I invariably double click something and end up with two panes on there. Now, what we could do at this stage is go to design form and add field by field and so on like that. But one of the advantages of a data source is that you can actually generate a form from a data source. So if we go to the bottom here under bind properties, it says select fields from the data source. So what we're saying here is that that's actually the customer header we want. And those of you who are familiar with business objects will recognize these are all the child elements of that header node that we actually selected earlier on. So all we've got to do now is go down here, customer names, address 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and postcode. I'm just looking at my spec now. We might as well just sort this alphabetically. Just bear with me for 2 ticks. So coming down here, we want our contact, customer on hold, email address, date of last payment. No, we don't need that. Email address, and I think telephone at the bottom. There. So once you've selected all these, we can actually add, and they'll get automatically added to there. If you've missed any off, you can just simply come along here and it will add the fields again, so you can nip in and out of the process. Now, it's actually come out in the order that it was on that list view, and we need to sort a few bits and pieces out. So the way that we do that is we go to Design Form. And these are our things. And all we've got to start doing now is highlighting them and move them. And you see that we move up and down on here. So I'm just going to quickly do that little lot. Contact was down here. Postcode is down here. So a customer name, our address, our postcode, contact telephone, that's as our spec. So once we've done that, we can save and exit. Okay, and then we will move on and add our financial info pane. To add the financial info pane is just the same as the customer info pane, but we do have 1 or 2 things to do with the fields because we're picking up some numeric ones. So first of all, we go to toolbox, we click on our form. Good, we will give it a name. So financial info. Looks okay. We might as well put it in place now to here, which looks good. Don't have to do anything there. We'll nip down to binding properties. We will pick up the totals that we want. So we're looking for current balance and then an age debt, current 30, 60, 30, 60, 90, 134, that's fine, that's good. Add those. And then we also want to pick up something off the header. So we'll sort this by alphabetical order. So we've got date of last payment and sale. And we want the number of outstanding orders and the outstanding order value. Add those on. And away we go. And this is the first time you will have seen the fact that we can actually merge or mix and match data from 2 data sources. So for instance, the current balance, if we go to our form field, is coming from customer totals current balance, and then the number of comes from customer header. And as far as app design is concerned, it sees the app, it has one complete application, and therefore it doesn't matter which pane the data goes for. It just hunts around all the panes looking for the relevant hole to plug an element in, and so on like that. What we've got to do now, though, is these are all text fields because they're coming from business objects. So if we highlight current balance for an example, go to our form field properties, it's currently saying it's alpha. And giving us an opportunity of changing its type. So we will change it to numeric, and we would set the length to 10 because it's around about 7 digits before the decimal point, and we want 2 after. And we just nip down here and do that for our name. So just bear with me for 2 ticks whilst I do that. Now, I'm deliberately going to miss out the 90 days because I want to show you something a little bit later on. So we'll just remember that for later. Data last payment is going to be a date. Data last sale is going to be a date. That's going to be numeric. And so is that. So that's looking good. So the next step that we've got to do is we've actually got to sequence these and add our group headers to them. So we do that in the form design here. So here's our form that we've just done, and you can now see date fields appearing and our numeric and the one that we missed out. So first of all, we need to add our group headers. So the first one, and the type is group heading. Add that. We'll add them all at the moment. So next one is age debt. Add that. And the one after that is sales order info. And we'll add that. Okay, so now we've done that, we need to move them into position. So we can pick this up and move it to the top, which is great. And according to our spec, the next field should be current balance followed by date of last payment. So all things being equal, we pick up our current balance and we put it on top of financial information, and it doesn't go in the group header. Now, that is because it's unaware really that that's what we're trying to do. All it thinks we're doing is sequencing the current balance above the group header. We need a way of being able to tell it to go into the financial information header. And the way that we do that is that we highlight the current balance, we press the Alt key down and the up arrow, and that immediately pops the current balance straight into the group header. Now that we've got one thing inside the group header, we can actually pick up date of last payment here, and we can move it to there. And it understands now because it's now ordering the elements within the group. So if we pick up our age debt and we move it to there, and we highlight current, press the Alt key down and up, we've got one in, and then we want our 30, 60, 90. Just move that to the top. This looks good. And then we've got our sales order info, so that goes up there. And we want our date of last sale, Alt and up arrow, and then outstanding order value number, and we put that up there. And that's got it sorted out quite nicely. So we'll save that. Looking good. Now, what I wanted to do is show you this, because if we've made a mistake here and we do days 90 and we come here and say, hold on, yeah, I've left it as alpha, so I will change this to numeric, and it's going to be 10 and it's 2, which is great. And what you'll find is it's dropped out of the group. Now, the reason for that is that what we've had to do is delete days 90 in this case as an alpha field and re-add it as a numeric field. So what we've got to do then is just pick it up, pop it back in there, and sort that out. Okay, now the other thing that we actually want to be able to do is probably change the caption, and you possibly want to do things like this and put the space in there and so on. So you can actually do what you like. Good, so we're making good progress. So let's run our app and see actually what it looks like. Before we can run our app though, there's one other thing I've got to do and one other thing that I'd like to show you. Where we are at the moment is that we've created our data source, which we'll do the query onto Syspro, retrieve the data. We've bound that data to the form, which is great. But what we haven't done is told the app when to do that. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is clicking on the customer combo, because what we wanted to be able to do is when we key the customer number in, we wanted to do the inquiries or the queries. All I've done is click on the combo. It's jumped straight to the relevant toolbar button. And down here under data sources, we just need to click data sources to execute. And here are our list of data sources. And in this instance, we want to be able to click them both. We just ignore that error message there, that one. And what will happen is that when the customer number changes, it will fire these two data sources in this order. Now, we'll be covering the sequence of data source execution a little bit later on, but I'll raise it first here. There will be times when it is important that you can control the sequence of the data sources. For example, if I had got a custom data source, maybe querying a SQL query on another database or an Access database for contact details, and I was using the contact field here to pass to a custom data source, I'd have to make sure that this form was populated before I executed the external call to get contact information. And to sequence them, all you've got to do is highlight them and move them. And you just go up and down the list, and App Designer will execute the data sources in the order that you see them in this list, or wherever you need to execute them. Okay, it's just a bit of an aside. So what we've got now is that the app knows when we're actually going to execute it, so we're going to apply that. One other thing I wanted to show you, if we go back to data sources, this is our list, but if we now expand this, we now see a list of all the fields that we're bound to, and if we actually click on one of them, it will take me straight to that field. So it's actually quite a good way of navigating, and if you needed to change any of the properties for the form or the field, they're there as well. So it's quite good, and a good way of double checking that you've actually bound your data source to the relevant forms. Okay, so we're cooking on gas now. So we've let's see what happens when we run our app. That's good. Okay, our app's popped up. Looks okay, and we'll pop our customer number in here. And there we go. So what's actually happened, if you remember, customer number's changed, it's whizzed off, run those business objects for us, return the data, patch them into our forms, and without one line of VB script so far. So what we're going to do now is add the one more pane here and see how that works, because that's going to be a list view. So to add our list view to our app, what we're going to do is go to the toolbox. We will click on the list view. It pops up here. We will pick it up and we will move it to where we want it. Let's just change the title to invoices, which is fine. And now what we want to do is go and sort out the binding, which is down here. And now we could bind to another data source, a business object data source if we wanted to, but since we can bind directly to the business object anyway, we might as well do that. We will bind to the ARSQRY. Let's go to select columns, and we want invoice detail, and then we select our columns. So we want invoice, invoice date, customer PO, and we want the sales order, which is fine. So we will just create columns. They've gone in there, look. And we want to, and then primary node, because we selected it, has gone to invoice detail, which is great. And now with a list view, the list view is sort of listening for an event so that it can populate itself in effect. That's how the way I remember these things. So we want to be able to say it's going to be a toolbar executed event, and what object or what control on a toolbar is going to be the customer number. So when the customer number changes, we want it to execute this binding on here. And that's really all we've actually got to do. So let's go and see what actually happens with that if we run our app. Good, that's come up. So we'll just pop our customer one in. And there we go. As easy as that. So what we're going to do now is move on and see if we can click on a row on our invoices list view here and pop up some details in the sales order. And the final bit of our little app is we need a form down here with some sales order information. So let's do that. But before we do that, we've got to start off by creating a data source. So we'll go to our add query data source, and we're going to call this sales order master underscore table. I'll explain that. Why? Because this time what we're going to be doing is using a data dictionary table rather than the business object, and just to show you the differences. A data dictionary table query will take a single key and do a query onto that table and return the single row of data, which is all we need at the moment. Very, very straightforward. And what we want to be able to do now is choose the table. Well, in fact, you can browse for it, but I can assure you that it's called SOR Master, Sales Order Master. Oops, there we go. And that's all we've got to do. You can look at the table properties and look at the dictionary viewer, which will show you some of the detail of the columns and things like that. But we'll just save that. And come out of there. You can see our new one tucked away there. That's good. We're going to be adding our form. And we'll drag this back down here now. And we'll go to pane properties and call it something like sales order detail. Oops. Detail, which is fine. So now we've got to do our little trick of generating and binding. So we come down here, we look for the data source, and we're going to be picking up our table. The icons are indicating the different types of data source, so we'll pick that up, which looks good. And this is all the columns that query is going to be returning to us. So we will just sort this. And what we want is we come down as S's. We want the sales order date, sales order number, salesperson, and special instructions. So we'll select those. They've been added. Okay, so just it worked exactly the same as when we were using the other data source. There is one slight difference. If I click on, say, something like the sales order number, go to the field properties here, it's not giving me an opportunity of changing the type of field that it is. And this is because it already knows. It's done a query onto the database, it's picked up the characteristics and the type of field, the size of it and everything like that. So unlike the business object returning data in an XML stream where it's all a string, in this instance it actually knows and it's done all the work for us. And just as before, there's our field binding, there's our data source and our element name. So the only other thing we've got to do here is actually say, when do we actually want to populate it? Well, in fact, for forms, we have to go back to the list view here. And towards the bottom, we'll close this down here. We actually have what source do you want to execute? And just as a reminder, this is when we click on a row. So on row selected, that's the event. What do you actually want me to do? So the first thing to do is we want to select a data source. There's our sales order master. So that's the one we want to execute. So we'll apply that. That's good. And then it's saying, fine, well, where am I going to find the key to pass to that data source? So we'll say it's actually, this is the columns, and we'll take it from the sales order column. And we just, hold on. We don't want a dialog box being shown. We could have popped up a dialog form and things like that. We don't need that. So let's run our app and let's see what actually happens. Looking good. Okay, so here we go. Good, so that's worked as before. So theoretically, if we click on one of these lines here, there we go. So when we clicked on there, it executed that other data source and populated it. And I keep on having to remind myself, we've done all this without one line of code. That's really quite good. So, okay, that's our app sorted out. So we've just got to move on to the next section. As I was saying earlier on, the thing that surprises me is you can do all this without any VB script, but it does raise the problem. How do we know what on earth is going on? What is App Designer actually doing? And to show you that, I'm just going to do this and just the bottom of the cogs here, you'll see something called Tracer, Start Tracer. This is a tracing app that, and we'll just stretch it out here, that all the apps talk to. There is a full course on the tracer, so this is just a little bit of a preview really, but just to show you that if I come in here and type in so you typed in the number one, it's fired all the apps, the data sources. So we can see here, for instance, there's a toolbar. The value I entered into it, one, it raised event ID 38,000. The caption was customer, which is there. And when that fired, it fired the data source. So we can, if we hover over this, we can see the XML in going into ARSQRY. On this one here on the totals, similar sort of thing. Here we've got the list view was cleared automatically by the system. And then we have the user event that cleared it. If we come on here and now we click on here, we can actually see that we on row selected fired a user event, it raised event ID 34,000. This is really for if you're VB scripting, and we can actually see that the data source was using ComFetch on SAW master using the key that we actually pass through to it. Now, as I say, there's a full course on the tracer, how you can edit the running VB script, how you can write to the tracer itself to help debug and all sorts of things like that. But this at least gives you a view of actually what on earth App Designer is doing and the sequence is actually doing it. So what we're going to be doing next is moving on to custom data sources, which are really a topic in their own right. So we'll stop this app build here and move on to the next section.